So what I want to share a little bit today in a quick story is how we're actually transforming BAYER and how cultural transformation is a very important part of that. Pleasure to be with all of you and to share a little bit the BAYER story. As mentioned, I am the head of performance rewards and culture in BAYER. I joined BAYER about 5 years ago as actually the head of HR for the consumer health division. And since half a year, I moved to this new position based in Leverkusen in Germany. So if we talk a little bit about culture transformation, it was shared a bit in the beginning as well. I mean, of course, we cannot ignore the fact that the world continues to change at an even more rapid pace. And I think you know all of the challenges, so I'm not going to kind of go deep on this one. But what we do know is that if we continue to do what we're doing before the world started to change drastically, we are not going to be successful. And if you define culture in a very simplistic definition as how stuff gets done in an organization, you need to change the way you operate, and culture is a very important element of that. So if we think a little bit about what's happening in the world, and how do we need to adjust in the company BAYER that I am part of. I mean, there is a new future of work equation. So the future of work, workplace, and workforce. How does that impact the way you work? And there is, of course, also a lot of new worth-it equations within employees. So health and well-being, including mental health, become more important. Leaders also need to make the office worth the commute. So what is important in community management, and how does the office play a role into that? I mean, flexible work, and I think we all experienced that also during the pandemic. It drastically increased the number of time spent in meetings for the average user since February 2020. And of course, then lastly is the social capital in a hybrid workplace is changing. That's a little bit of context. If I take it actually coming back to then, what is it in BAYER? So we're a fantastic company. We have a fantastic purpose: health for all, hunger for none. I think every employee in BAYER is contributing to that with their full heart and soul. But that doesn't mean that we also don't have our challenges. And our challenges are mainly around accountability, empowerment, and simplification. These are data coming from our employee engagement surveys, and these data have been persistent with us. We have very good engagement. We have highly employees who want to take accountability, but yet if you look sometimes in the way we operate, there are elements to really impact this. What we then also saw as a company is that we're a three-divisional based company. As you might know, we're in pharma, consumer health, and in crop science, that these challenges have been actually consistent across the divisions. So this kind of led to the discussion with the board of management and the leadership team to say, okay, why do we want to tackle this separately by division, and why don't we actually create a movement? And this movement is what we call ESP, and I'll talk a bit more around that. It's Engage, Shape, Perform, it stands for. And kind of setting this as kind of a new leadership expectation for our organization moving forward. Building on a couple of pillars. First of all, very strong foundation. We have a highly engaged organization. We have great talent. We have a strong core. And as I mentioned, our purpose, our vision, and our values are very, very dear to us. And of course, we have great divisions with fantastic strategic plans in order to serve more of the community out there with our products and solutions. But as said, we need to tackle our common pain points. And if we dive a bit deeper on what I said before, so decision making is not always done at the level where it should be done. So how can we really help leaders empower their teams? We have a high perceived organizational culture complexity. So, I mean, of course, if you work in a matrix environment and if you work in a three-divisional matrix, this could lead to unnecessary complexity and slower execution. So, what are some of the ways that we can work differently in order to move with speed? And then, if you look at it also in general, how do we really create a performance culture? And how do we really recognize and reward our top performers and help our poorer performance to kind of step up and deliver an even better outcome. This is actually the journey that we embarked on. And on that journey, we said, if you look at it from a very simplistic perspective, there are three components that we need to get better at. So engage, creating a truly global, highly engaged organization and top performance. Shape is actually making sure our business is future ready. Our business and organization seizes the opportunity of the future. And then perform is deliver on all our stakeholder commitments and our ambitions. And stakeholders are brought here. There are shareholders, they're the customers that we serve, they're our own employees to make sure that we actually deliver on that. So Sophia, engage, shape, perform is actually what the P stands for. This has been kind of installed as our leader expectations, and I'll come a little bit later on how we brought this alive. But we have created very simple narratives, very easy to remember narratives for our leaders, what is expected from them, like this inclusive workforce, like the collaboration and the power, like simplification at the core. Do we sometimes make things more complex than they need to be? Deliver on our financial and non-financial business goals. So these are all the elements that we are expecting our leaders to really focus on. So very exciting journey, and we actually decided to do this journey as one BAYER, so that we actually engage all our leaders around it. That's a little bit on the overall program. Now, the overall program, of course, has certain pillars in execution, and we call these cultural game changers in our organization. And for that, we have identified 5 priorities. One is performance excellence. So that is fostering employee development, that is linking performance to recognition, to rewards, and to development. And that is both focusing on the what and the how. We were already on that journey, but we're actually dialing that up to even do a better job on that. Talent development, together with my peers in the organization, how do we really attract the right talent? How do we develop? How do we really make sure leaders bring out the best in their people? I already mentioned inclusion and diversity. We have very strong goals on that one to achieve. And this is also critical if you really want to have a high performing culture. You can only do that by having an inclusive and diverse workforce. Future of work, many things are ongoing there. One of the practices that I want to highlight here is that we have started already 2 years ago a practice which is called #WOW. And #WOW is ways of working where we actually giving teams, leaders, and employees tools in order to make faster decisions, in order to build better teams. And there are 12 practices available to the entire organization that we have hundreds of coaches engaged into to make sure that they can be used and lead to better outcome. And then, of course, governance, structure, and decisions. So how do we really simplify decision making? How do we have the right organizational setups? When you look at spans of control, micro teams, but a lot more than organizational structure is who in the end makes the decision and drive things forward. That's in decomplexifying processes, systems, and that's where data plays a very crucial role into. We have certainly some of our systems are really good, but some of our other systems don't have the best user experience. So how do we modernize that, and how do you really create an impact on that? So this leads actually to leadership expectations where ESP is grounded onto, moving to processes that we want to actually get better at. but at the same time also make sure we improve our system landscape and in that way help our leaders achieve a better outcome. So maybe if I go a little bit deeper into, okay, that's all great. Sorry, I moved one slide too far. These are all great initiatives, but what does success look like? And then what do we want success to feel like for the organization? And this is how we are going to measure success also in the future. Are we able to attract the best talent? Are we able to keep the best talent? Are we able to move the talent organization forward? What about skills and how do we evolve into, how do we move into that? We of course want to be an impact driver. I mean, purpose is critical, as you all know, to our employees. And again, what better purpose could you have as a company as BAYER? So how do we really make sure people connect to that even more than they currently are? For employees, energy and passion, they need to feel empowered. They need to make sure that they help each other get better, to constructive feedback, working together as one team. And in the end, of course, that employees feel that they can deliver on their own goals, their own aspirations, is the most important element, and it's more important than following, if I would call it like that, the internal process steps. Okay, so how are we activating this? So we are actually activating this to several elements. So as I mentioned, we have the game changers. These are being implemented consistently into the organization. At the same time, we have also country activations that are happening where actually we bring the entire BAYER community together at country level, where we actually going to have discussions on, okay, what is expected from our leaders? How are they committing behind that? What does it mean in the country and culture you operate in? We are actually having new ways of working, learning series, the hashtag WOW practices, that will help our employees to learn and apply agile ways of working in order to drive to better, faster outcome. And then we also have community engagement events where we actually work in open space, in hackathons, in Shark Tank principles to hear the voice of our employees and co-create solutions locally where it makes most sense. So that's where we are on the activation in country. But we're also activating our leaders. And when you create a movement, and I think you all know that, you of course have to make sure that you engage people at all levels in the organization. And we also have to make sure that leaders understand where we want to go to. So in 2022, we started with the rollout of our leader expectations. These leader expectations, as mentioned, were linked to engage, shape, perform as an outcome. And in 2022, we actually had our, call it top 500 leaders going to what we call 4 leadership huddles. In those 4 leadership huddles, we equipped our leaders with peer-to-peer coaching, but at the same time with very simple tools of how can you make an impact in an easy and simple way. We help them understand what it takes to be a leader as a coach. We help them to understand to how to set really ambitious goals and how to help people hold accountability for that. We helped our leaders. What is the concept around total responsibility? And so instead of saying it is the problem of somebody else, no, how do I own the problem and how do I build my share of responsibility into the solution? So we had 500 leaders going through these huddles, and at the same time, they were then asked to practice these new ways with their teams. We also actually started to roll out, and that is with our 10,000 people leaders. And these 10,000 people leaders are going to a similar experience around these 4 practices. And it is being facilitated by our top 500 leaders. where they share their stories, where they share what they went through, where they share their learnings. So we actually built a community of leaders together with the people leaders in the organization. Um, and lastly, on the country activation, as I mentioned before, that's where we actually are building that community together as well and get everybody involved. Um, we are doing this consistently. We are doing this country by country, and we're doing this where the energy goes. I will address your question in a moment, Otti. So give me a second to kind of finalize the presentation. Now, okay. So what are early results? So we started the initiative in February. We are now November. We are still in the rollout phase of many of those elements. However, a few weeks ago, we got the results of our employee voice survey. And our employee voice is what we call our employee engagement survey. And we measure accountability, empowerment, and simplification there for the entire organization. And we saw already uptake in those results. Now, of course, this is not only related to initiatives that we're doing. This is related thanks to the initiatives of all divisions, all leaders, all of HR. But doing this consistently, making this public, talking about that, is already showing that we can impact those results. So we're going to continue the journey. We're building the plane as we're flying. So we're also adding new initiatives and approaches to it. But we can already say that it is highly welcomed and an integral part of the strategies that divisions and BAYER are building, and of how our organization is actually going to modernize itself from a cultural perspective. I know there was a lot to share here, so I'm looking forward also to answer any questions. So I'll start with maybe a very good question. So on the typical traditional top-down cascade of superior head of wisdom, how is this building on collective creativity in the design? How is it shaping good organizational character? Who we are, not what we deliver. Are we not perpetuating the same old best practices which have failed us for the last 5 decades? Very good question. And let me give you a very simple perspective on that. And every perspective is company relative. So my answer to that question might be different in the company that you are, or in the company that um, uh, the way your company is being set up. So first of all, absolutely right. We have to make sure that every employee gets engaged into this journey. And for us, our answer on that is in the game changer initiatives, but it's also in the country activation. So hashtag wow ways of working is for every employee. Country activation is where we actually build the communities and actually help them to be part of the solution. At the same time, when you create a movement, you also have to be sure that top management, and this is kind of this clay middle layer that a lot of times is talking about, that they're with you on that journey. So you cannot decouple the movement with all of the employees with how you actually activate all your leadership and hold your leadership accountable to that as well. And the last thing that I will also say on this is that for us it was critical that we do this together as one BAYER instead of doing this separately by each division or each country. And I don't know how it is in your organization, but if you want to create a cultural kind of change at scale, you need to make sure that you have consistent language, consistent approaches, culturally relevant to the country that you're implemented in. And now that we're doing this together, holding all of our leaders accountable and asking them to join this journey, we believe that we're going to get to a better outcome than we do it separately. Um, So that's a bit my answer to this question, but looking forward to any interaction in the future to see what other experiences or the ideas you have on that. So Ilka, you're asking on, can you elaborate on the practices you share to empower employees, simplify decision making, etc. Also, do you have other KPIs for that topic besides surveys, e.g., reduced number of approval processes, but how to measure it? Yeah, great question. So yeah, we have practices which are called even overs. We have practices that are called safe to try, which is a way to come to decisions in a faster way. We have practices that are called rounds to make sure that you create an inclusive environment. And these have been actually installed into the teams to make sure that they can apply them appropriately. We have done that to actually activating cultural coaches and hashtag wow coaches that are actually enabling this in to the organization. Um, we measure this to a couple of elements. In the one, an important one for us is the employee voice survey. But there are also other ways that we measure it. So the number of coaches that are actively installing these practices in the organization, the numbers of teams that are producing business outcome. And when we launched it, we actually launched this into intact teams where we measured a team that was creating a new product, for instance, that was in the consumer health division. Do they get to rapid prototyping faster using these practices or not? And we saw that it actually was leading to these outcomes. On reduced number of approval processes, there is a lot more that we're doing, of course, than the cultural initiatives. That's why governance is part of that. For instance, in BAYER transformation, we are looking at how do we change our processes? How do we change the number of approval levels that are into this? We are actually, together with one of my business colleagues, looking at our system landscape where approval levels are baked into to how do we make that easier. So you have to work on the soft, which is the culture. You have to work on the hard, which is on the processes at the same time in order to do that. There will be measurements behind that, but this would lead me in a lot of detail, process by process, of what this looks like. So maybe move to Gabor. You are in the middle of the planned journey. What are your top learning reflections from the last first year? I wouldn't even say that we're in the middle. I would more say we're at the end of the start of the journey. So we are now in a relatively good space of making sure it's embedded into the transformation programs of BAYER and the divisions. We have now it really embedded into our leadership mindset. The organization knows what we're trying to achieve, but the activation of the game changes, the counter activations, the really making it part of how you do it, so that people become self-sustainable. For instance, also in the how practices is on the wow practice is still a journey that we're on. One of my learnings on this one is critically important is that you help people understand what you're trying to achieve, and don't take the assumption that everybody is jumping on board, because even divisions or leaders have an idea around this. When you talk about cultural change, I sometimes say that there are more opinions than that there are solutions in changing an organization. And it does take time to get leaders with you. Not that leaders are against it, but why is it important? Why is it important now? What's in it for me? Why should I engage into this? And repetition, listening, activating is critical with that. Secondly is, and that's always a challenge, I think, with a lot of initiatives, is more important than the PowerPoint is the execution. And the execution is something that you do have to adjust based on the reality a division or a country is in. And that's why you need to show some flexibility. This is not a control from the top. This is again a movement that we want to do together. I think lastly, what I want to say on this as well, this is a moving target. And what I mean with that is what you envision in the beginning is for sure going to look different when you're 6 months, 1 year, 2 years into the journey. So that's why I use that element as you're building the plane as you're flying is you're going to have to continuously quarter by quarter readjust, see what is working well, what is not working, take the learning, adjust and move on. So I can share a lot more perspectives also, Gabor, later on. But stick to the plan, stick to the journey, despite of the sometimes the challenge you have is the consistency of approach and moving forward with the agility and listening skills to adopt where needed. I think that's a fundamental part of the journey. So Marie-Louisa, what are thoughts, plans on how to hold leaders accountable for role modeling the change? It's a great question. Let me first start with saying this is we have great leaders in BAYER. And you cannot emphasize that also in the organizations that you operate in, emphasize that enough. But as you know, the demands of a leader have been increasingly becoming more difficult because of the world is changing, because the expectation of the employees, because of many things. Now, if you look at that context, and if you look at how do you really hold leaders accountable, you first have to recognize that their job is not easy. And then you have to say, okay, how are we going to help you in order to really execute your job? And some of the axes that I sometimes use, Marie-Louise, is in BAYER, there is no leader who would question that this is not important. So if you take that on the x-axis, but if you move it to, is it a priority? Is it urgent? That's where it sometimes gets trumped with all of the other challenges that leaders have. And we have to move the mindset of the leader from important to important and urgent. We measure, we have a leader dashboard where we measure outcomes on the survey where leaders can compare themselves against other leaders in BAYER, see how am I doing. So this creates a little bit of healthy competition amongst the leaders. We are actually now discussing and defining on how are we going to make sure that we reward the great leaders and help leaders that might need more help. And how you can call that positive and negative consequence management. We haven't fully figured that one out yet. So that's still a discussion that we're doing internally here. So I'd be happy to come back or happy to hear any ideas you might have in how to best do that. And then Joe, most of the companies fail for the culture transformation is because people cannot see the change from leaders. Leaders just talked, but not walk the talk. Yeah, I mean, that is, I mean, you call it authentic leadership, you can call that walking the talk, you can call that many things. But that's also why I personally believe it was critically important we start from the top. And that means in BAYER, our board of management has fully engaged into this. So they're making this in the importance versus urgent. They're putting this change on urgent. They're going themselves to all of the trainings, the huddles, what they need to do in order to do that. Our top 500 leaders, they're going to exactly the same. And why I believe that this is a different initiative than maybe what we've done in the past is our top 500 leaders are actively involved in rolling this out in the experience that our 10,000 leaders are going through. So just to give a reference from roughly our top 500 leaders, 350 of them have signed up to be part of the rollout to the entire organization. If you talk about our 10,000 leaders that we have roughly in BAYER, so people leaders, we already have, and my numbers are 3 weeks old, so they're probably already way higher. We have more than 6,000 people who have signed up for the training experience. And this was not a mandatory request. So if you look at this, you see a huge momentum in the organization if we want to do this. Yeah, more to come, but I'm certainly very excited about this. So, hey, colleagues from Rush, great to see. I was looking at your building when I was Basel-based before I moved to this job. At Rush, we also have a what and how component to performance assessment, and the how is equally weighted, sometimes even more in the final assessment. That is very impactful. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think we have what and how is important for all of it. The question is, how do you operationalize this sometimes, because how do you really make sure leaders assess it in the right way? And that's where I think we play a crucial role as an HR in really sometimes also be courageous in HR and really tell the leaders and hold them accountable for doing it properly. That is always easier said than done, but I couldn't agree more. We are going to measure again, as said, the outcome. We're going to hold leaders accountable for driving progress. And if you have any ideas, Marie-Louisa from Roche, that you say, hey, you might want to think about this, please drop me a note, because more than happy to learn more on that as well. So I think I covered most of the questions. I see that Adela has a similar program, so looking forward to hearing your learners, Adela. So what were your kind of do's and don'ts if you think about it afterwards? But I can tell you that where we are now on this kind of 6-month journey, it is actually beating my expectation. I mean, the way this is embraced, the way our leaders are behind this, the way also our social partners are with us on this journey is nothing short but amazing. So 3 minutes left, so I'll see if I can answer one more question. Could you please clarify how did you overcome the initial resistance from the leaders? I was curious to know if you have developed a journey map to help employees and new starters visualize the future state of desired cultural outcomes. So 2 questions. So Claudia, I mean, first of all, what I think is important is that you help leaders solve the problems that they have. And that's why we started with the common problems at BAYER. So everybody in BAYER wanted to step up on how do we drive accountability. Every leader in BAYER wanted to step up on how do you drive empowerment. And everybody in BAYER, every leader wanted to simplify us as an organization on decision making. So we started to address with a real business problem and business problems that were common. And that was actually the key to overcome the initial resistance. Then it comes down to sticking to the communication, being clear on how the rollout is going to look like, engaging leaders in the communication. So many of the communications that we're doing on Engage, Shape, Perform is actually what we call leader-led. It's not necessarily HR only on stage, but it's senior leaders talking to the community as to why this is important. And then walking the talk. I mean, the leaders who walk the talk, put them in the spotlight. Make sure that you take it seriously, and then the rest will follow. Have we developed a journey map to help employees and new starters visualize the future state of desired cultural outcomes? Yes and no. We have an emerging journey map, but there's still more work to be done onto that as we're building the plane as we're flying. So more to come on that one. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the session.